Allie?
Thank you, Ruth, and thank you, Mark, for those amazing welcoming remarks. I am the policy manager, as Ruth just mentioned, and I have the pleasure of introducing our next presenter and speaker, Jack McDevitt. I'm just going to share a few words. I think a lot of people on this call are familiar with Jack and his connection to the coalition, but I do want to just spend some time sharing a little bit of history of who he is and the man that you see before you. Jack McDevitt is a professor of the practice emeritus in the School of Criminology and Criminal Justice at Northeastern University. Jack was the founding director of the Institute on Race and Justice at Northeastern University, and he is a co-author of three books, several on hate crimes and victimology, as well as with other co-authors. He has also co-authored dozens of publications and reports on hate crime, racial profiling, police misconduct, gun violence, and human trafficking. In 2014, specifically, he was appointed by the Speaker of the Massachusetts House of Representatives to chair a gun violence commission to make recommendations on ways to reduce gun violence in the Commonwealth. He has spoken on hate crime, racial profiling, human trafficking, and security, both nationally and internationally, and has testified as an expert witness before the Judiciary Committees of the U.S. House of Representatives. And in May of 2024, Jack gave the keynote address at the White House Conference Hate Crimes Issues with Measurement and Impact on Victims, advancing understanding of hate and bias incidents specifically. So that is a lot, and we're just so happy to have Jack with us today to give us a little bit of an overview on some data dashboards that have been recently released. And I will then just pass the mic to Jack to give a little overview of how these came about and where they're housed, and then we'll kind of dive into a demo after that. Jack.
Thanks, Ali. It's much more formal than we needed of an introduction. Thank you very much. Ali and I will be doing the presentation today, and I would encourage you to put questions in the chat or raise your hand or come off mute or whatever. As we're talking, we don't. This is an informal conversation, and if you have a question or you have something that you might want to make a suggestion about, don't wait till the end. Just say, stop talking, McDevitt, and we'll be happy to listen. Um, so, just a little bit of background to set up what we're going to do today. We're going to show you how the system works, hopefully, and show you what's in there and what isn't in there yet, and what's going to be in there in the future. We're going to show you some ways to do an analysis yourself. One of the things about the way they've done it here is it's a pretty user-friendly system, so you can sort of go ahead and poke around and see what things you might like to learn yourself. And we'll give you a couple of examples of that as we go through the little demo today. And I think it's just it's the end of a long. I'll get back to this, but it's the end of a long set of uh, um, bills and failed bills and advocacy by this organization, many of the people on this call that have finally got this to happen. So the data set is on the website of the Executive Office of Public Safety and Security, and we can hook you up with the link to it. Um, as I looked around to sort of do this little presentation, it's true that not many states have their gun data up at a statewide level. You will see some. There's between a dozen and maybe 20 cities that have it up for their city jurisdiction, but very few states have it up. And one of the reasons for that is that some of our colleagues and friends at Johns Hopkins Center, Giffords, and Everytown have done some of this work themselves by pulling together data and putting together, statewide analyses of gun legislation, of gun violence, of, all of the different elements here. So there is some data out there, but it's nice to be at a state where they're trying to do it on an official basis. It's always the case that when data is put up, people question the source of the data, how it was arrived at, why it's up there. And when it has the imprimatur of a city or a state, it at least has some official uh, recognition. So I think it's a really good movement. we're not where we want to be, of course, but we're a lot better than we were when Janet first talked to me about this about 7 or 8 years ago. So, so the coalition's been probably the strongest voice to put this dashboard together, uh, to come up in all kinds of different situations. When I was doing the 2014 role for the speaker, where we went around and spoke to people across the state and different groups and all of that. The data was a big need, and it was something that everyone was talking about. How do we get better data? How do we get data that we can feel is more reliable? Because as we all know in this area, some people have data that they put forth, and it may not be what you or I would consider clean data. So, as Ruth mentioned, this became part of the omnibus bill that was passed in 24, and it became real and went live on October 28th of 25. So, in the sort of chronicle and scheduling of state government, that's pretty quick. So, it's been up since then. And the way that they plan to do this is, so it came up in October. They plan to update the dashboard quarterly. So to feed in new data so we can start to have more analyses we can do and more different ways to go about it, that will happen quarterly. Quickly, and this is all on the website, so if you log on, you can see it. So you don't have to, take notes or anything. But it combines a whole bunch of different data sources that haven't been brought together very often in the past, just to issues of firearm violence. So it has the National Incident-Based Reporting System, which is the FBI system. It used to be a summary-based system, then it went to incident-based, and now that's the standard for across the country. This is where every police department across the country is asked to send their data on a monthly basis to the FBI, and the FBI collects it together. The second data set that's in here is the Office of the Medical Examiner, which is taking a look at causes of death. And they have some other, and in some cases, reliable measures of gun homicides and gun suicides in that data. So that's a good addition to the FBI data. Then we have the data from the Massachusetts Crime Gun Database. That's used by law enforcement to enter in criminal incidents that involve firearms. The Massachusetts Instant Record Check System, which is the system that integrates licensing and gun transactions, so that if you go to buy a gun, you have to have a license, and the license is recorded in this system. And we'll show you a little bit of that. ATF and their e-trace system. This is the trace system, which means if a gun is used in a crime, we can go back to where the gun was originally manufactured and the first point of sale and know who bought that gun, where was the gun made, and who bought that gun. In some cases, we can then trace that gun to how it got to the person who used it in a crime. Not in all cases, but ATF is the source of that information, and they're adding that in. And then the Massachusetts Trial Court, and we'll show you a little bit of that, has data on dispositions of gun cases. One of the challenges is if we do have the police take it seriously and we do go out and make an arrest, what happens to that arrest? And depending on the kind of case it is, we could have a really spirited conversation about what might be the best kinds of things for courts to do. It may not be sentencing everybody to jail, but it would be holding people accountable for violence. So that's sort of the data sets that they're trying to bring together. I'll tell you at the end a little bit about the plans for the next phases of it, but we wanted to take a minute to show you what's there and how it works. So Allie's going to take us through the first couple of elements in the database. the victims and the offender data. This is victims of gun violence and offenders in gun violence.
Right. Thanks, Jack, for kind of setting the stage for why we even have this data dashboard in the first place, and how the coalition has played an instrumental role in getting this up and running. Um, I wanted to just pause here on the first page before we jump down to the victim demographics. You can be like me and you can bookmark it so you have it at the ready for when you're about to jump into the State House and talk about this, or if you're at the more local level, this is just really good equipment and another tool in our belt to use in our advocacy. The introduction and the about the data dashboards is are sections within the entire webpage that are just going to go in more detail of what Jack just talked about. But I'll just note that on here, you can click on any of this and you'll just jump straight to that section. So for example, we'll just dive right into the first data dashboard. You can also return back to the top with this button or to the table of contents right here as well. Before we jump into any more nitty-gritty data and the dashboard itself, are there any questions that are popping up? And feel free to just add them to the chat too. But if there are any questions on how this came about, we're happy to answer that as well. Just give a few seconds. Cool. For this first data dashboard here, I want to note that it does clearly state that the data only covers this time period, which is limited. But as they mentioned, and as Jack mentioned, they will be adding more and more data, hopefully sooner than later. But this also tells you in this section which of those data sources that Jack mentioned are actually specifically feeding into this data dashboard. So I wanted to just highlight that before we move on to the actual graphics. For here, you'll notice all these little modules, the year, county, the offense type. For this specifically, we only have 2025 data, but in other ones, they have more. And then by county, sometimes it says by location, and so that'll be more cities. You can always clear your selections here, and then the offense type is here. For this at the bottom right, for folks who need a little help to see it more clearly, you can zoom in. A little goes a long way, I will say. And then if you feel like, oh no, I need to change that back, you can always click this to fit it back to where it started. And lastly, I'll note that if you click this button, it'll totally come to the biggest full effect in the full page setup. But because I'm sharing screen, when you are in that full screen mode, you have to escape to get out of it, and then it jumps you back to the top of the page. So to avoid any clunkiness, I'm going to stick with this page right here. And of course, you can follow along on your own
Allie, and
laptop.
if you don't mind, we'll go back and forth and stuff. But for those of you who are not Allie's age and are closer to my age, when you start messing around with this data, you think, oh my God, am I going to mess something up? You can't. You can click everything you want to click. You can move anywhere you want to move. And it's not going to, the data stays pure in the backside. So all you do is just bounce around in it. So you can do anything you want to do, and you won't hurt anything, or no one's, nothing's going to get damaged. Go ahead, Al.
No, that's such a good point. Yes, feel free to jump in, Jack. For this, we wanted to just highlight all the data that's shown. The automatics feature is this full view. So even if you like deselect everything, the full view is always the default. For the demographics here, it shows it by gender, by race, ethnicity, and age group. You'll notice, as well as I can't do quick math, so I've written them down ahead of time here. But on the offender data, on the victim data, it'll be 749 victims in total, and about 68% of that is male. And then that is for all offensive types, but we also wanted to note the difference in these types, including suicide. So if you want to deselect them all, but just want to look at suicide, you have it automatically. For this proportion, it's closer to 90% male. And then you can see the age breakdowns on the far right, looking at above 50 years of age. This is pretty typical, I think, of what we see nationally as well. But of course, this is all very preliminary, few data. We can't really draw huge conclusions, but it's just interesting to see the numbers. And when you do add multiple, it's cumulative. So just note that you're looking at all data. Um, it won't separate it by issue type. But yeah. And so that's for the victims. The next talks
Allie,
about the,
maybe
yeah,
there's a question in the chat. Sonia was asking if there's a plan to go back in time and add this. Um, Probably not. It would be great if they did, and we can keep asking. But they were planning on building it from this period on. So they're going to add new data each quarter. Uh, there's no reason they couldn't go back some, but I think the plan is for them to start with the original date and move forward with it.
yeah, that's a bummer. But thank you for making that note.
You can go on to the offenders now. That's
Yeah. So this shows demographics for the offenders, just noting the different caveats and the date, and then also the data source, which all just make sense. The dispositions are just associated with exactly what Jack was saying. It's like how the case was completed, what was the actual conclusion. So just looking down at this data point, this shows all the data. This also is only 2025. Like I mentioned, this isn't by county, but it is by more granular by city. And then different dispositions, dismissed, guilty, responsible, etc. And then the firearm violation group is just what they were accused of. Some of the points that we wanted to highlight here are that there are, because this is a different time frame as well. So there's going to, can't compare apples to oranges necessarily with this and the victims, but this is about 5,575 offenders in total, with the majority being male. And then if you wanted to look by violation type, we deselect all. For example, we want to know about firearm storage and handling. Storage violations are about 824, broken up by race, ethnicity, and age once again. So as you can tell, that a lot of these data could be helpful in at least talking about it with legislators or municipal leaders, just to tell them like what's happening in our state now that we have the data to back it up. And honestly, just is another case for what we've already been saying here at the coalition. And another violation group that was particularly interesting is transfer, purchase, and sale violation. Just like how Jack was talking about, like a lot of this really helps say like where the gun is coming from, and from whose hands to whose hands has it been passed and who should be held accountable. So this at least gives us a high level view of what's going on in our state in regards to this issue.
and it also, just as Allie and I will go back and forth, it also says there's 59 offenders for transfer violations. We know that people are giving guns away or selling guns away all the time in the state, and they're not um, putting it all in the portal. They're not recording these all. And so it speaks to a little bit of, what's the priority that local law enforcement is putting on, you know, uh, offenders for selling guns without proper licensing or proper documentation. And if it's, less than one or just about 1% of the offenders that show up in the portal, we know it's not a high priority. So, maybe that's something that we want to talk to law enforcement about, maybe Massachusetts chiefs or somebody, um, and we can start them thinking, are there ways you could, you could do this. As you all may know, every police department is required to go and visit every gun seller in their jurisdiction every year. They Some do it much more thoroughly than others. And so this might be a place where we could start to, have another level of refinement in how guns are sold in Massachusetts. So just this just points you in that kind of direction. So I think it's helpful that way. Thank you, Alan.
Yeah. I see another question from Nan. Is there a way to identify straw purchases, and are all counties represented?
The answer is all counties are represented.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that they all have data on each of these. And we can't identify straw purchasers yet, but in one of the things that they're trying to put in for the future, we may be able to identify straw purchasers. For everybody on the call, I think you all know, but straw purchasers are somebody who buys the gun for someone else, and that could be a friend, a girlfriend, somebody who's doing it under duress. There's a variety of different ways that comes to happen, and so that's where we might be doing this. Um, Ghost guns, Ned, ghost guns are in the data if they're um, seized in a gun crime, for example, but they aren't being pulled out right now as a separate category. So that's something that we could encourage them to do in the future. Um, Mike is the source of race, gender, etc., put in the local police after each incident, and where's the original data kept? Um, they So for the offender data, that would be the race and ethnicity data would be recorded by the local law enforcement officer. Um, I will tell you that the standard is out there that they don't ask people. They just make an observation and go with that. Some police officers ask, but few. Most of them just type it into their little boxes on their computer. And the original is kept at the police department, but then all this data is sent into EOPS, and that's where this is coming from. Thanks everybody for putting things in the chat. Happy to talk to them. Ellie, we're going to go on
Likewise.
to
Yeah,
dispositions.
for sure. Um, Something that I also found interesting, which is also they track serial number and firearm tampering here. Um, Jack, I don't know if you know specifically what the qualifications are for this category, but I'm imagining it's as what it is, like erasing the serial number and perhaps like
Filing it
also
off,
cutting off
erasing it,
rifle.
putting acid on it,
Yeah,
any way to try to make it difficult to get at the firearm number, because that's used to trace the gun.
yeah,
So when you send a gun into ATF or an E-Trace, they're going to go by the firearms ID number as the source for where they will go back to the E-Trace. So that's why that's important. Great point, Allie.
cool.
So
Then
this is
yes,
firearm incidents.
this
Uh,
is firearm incidents offender, and then we'll go on to firearm incidents disposition, just a little bit more in depth about the
yep.
offense severity. Um, a lot more categories here. The disposition is very much similar to what we've seen before, but there are more specific violation group and firearm charges. I am not a lawyer or a judge, so a lot of these seem similar to me, but I'm sure there are differences in between the violation and what their actual charges were. Just at a high level, you can notice that for those who were found guilty, for example, um, the total for felonies is around 4,800, 2,000 for misdemeanors, and a total for both is over 7,000. Um, and it looks like most are felonies. I think we know that firearms often elevate any kind of charge or violation to a more severe offense. depending on what that violation of charge is as a felony. Jack, did you want to add more about this guilty disposition section?
Sure. So you do have the dispositions there, and like all cases, most of these are plea bargains. But in the just to give you an idea of the scope of it, so there's 25,000 incidents in this incident disposition, and this is the stuff that's coming from the trial court because that's the only place that has the disposition, the trial court data. And we had 2,000, 25,000, about 10% are guilty, and about three times that number are dismissed. So, you know, it is the case that our courts are struggling with how to handle gun cases, um, and the combination of the evidence brought in by the police, the case put together by the prosecutor, and everything that we're still getting many more dismissals than we are guilty dispositions. So that may be appropriate, but it just raises a question. And you could see that from this data. We never had it before, so we couldn't. It was very hard to look at the trial court data and just pull it out for just for firearm cases. This allows you to do that, and I think that's really big and a big positive for this. I think we were going to go to licenses next,
Yeah, I
and this is
see
the
another.
depressing one in
I
in
know
my
this
mind.
is it's a little bit heavy. I see Nan also has another question. Are any permits revoked if the case is dismissed? That
Um,
would be interesting to see on this dashboard.
yeah, that would be good. It would be nice if we could have data on ERPOs as well, and that could be one way that those permits could be revoked, right? Or the guns could at least be taken away for a short period of time. But I don't believe that that's a common practice in Massachusetts. But we should ask them to do that so we can find out. I think, yeah, we don't want, we're coming up to, I don't want to take too much time and keep the questions coming though. So these are the license applications, and this is demographic data on who's applying for a license. And the reason I say it's sort of depressing is, you know, as we all know, we're a low gun purchase and gun holding, gun carrying state. But we did have in this data goes back to 2003, which is very different than the data that Allie's been showing you before. That was just 1 year. So this goes from 2003 to 2025. That's a long period. A lot of differences there. But when we look at that, there's 1,800,000 applications filed. So that's a lot of applications. We only have 6.5 million people here in Massachusetts, coming on 7, but 1,800,000, almost 2 million people have filed applications. Now, this could be renewals are in here. It's not as bad as I'm making it sound, but it is the case that they have lots of applications in here. But when we just broke, Ally can show you, if you just break it out by new applications, so these are not renewals, they're not other kinds of applications, but new applications is nearly 700,000 new applications over this period. So that's uh, a little bit of information. And the other thing that Ali can show you is that in the chart, the most sought after kind of application is license to carry. You know,
Yep.
pistol. Some of our friends from Goal will talk about the pistol target shooting kind of things, but when people go to the police department to get an application, they generally are applying for a license to carry. Um, and then the next one, that's the active license count. That's the one I was mentioning. And then we also have one thing that has been a topic of debate, and we have some data on it now, is in individual jurisdictions, how many licenses are turned down. Our friends from Goal say all the time that there are places in Massachusetts that, you know, no one could get a license because they have to go to the police department. The police department says, no, we're not going to give any licenses. Well, that's just patently false. And that's one of the things that we can show here is how many people apply, how many people are granted the license, and how many people are turned down or revoked or suspended. So it's really helpful to know how your police department is making decisions about people applying for licenses. And to just, I calculated these numbers for you to just give you an example. In Boston, in the database here, about 5,000 people started the application process for a license. And Boston's probably the one of the strictest communities in the state. 80% had received their license, so 80% of the 5,000 received their license. About 7.3% were turned down, um, and 0.002% were revoked, and 2.7% were suspended. So the fact is that even in Boston, which is one of the most um, restrictive communities, 80% of the people who apply for a license get it. So, those kind of applications are really the arguments are just false. And now we have some data provided by the state that sort of shows that. And you could look up your own community. You can have some fun, look up communities that are near you and sort of see what's the rate of denials and what's the rate of suspensions and those kind of things. Um, the one thing that I'll say is that two other quick things, and then we can get to the things on the bottom and just do questions. One is if we could look at the statewide applications from 2004 and compare them to 2024. In 2004, there were 23,000 applications for a license. In 2024, there were 140,000 applications. So that's 23 to 140,000. So we're seeing an increase in people applying for licenses. It's about a six-fold increase. And one of the places where we see the biggest increase is women applying for licenses. So in 2004, 17% of the people who were applying for a license were female. And in 2024, that's 26%. So it nearly doubled. And so, we can start to see from this data little trends like that. What's happening? How are things changing? Those kind of issues. Um, and, trying to just sort of see where things are going. As I said, they have on the website where they expect to uh, have more data, and they're looking for data for crime guns. They're looking for data. They're going to add data on crime guns. They're going to add data on uh, e-trace. So they're looking to build this out both with more cases from different jurisdictions, as well as some new sets of data about how we're tracing the acquiring of guns. I don't know that they're going to put ERPOs in, but it would be a great thing if they do. It's not a lot of them, but it'd be nice to know which jurisdictions are using those. So Allie and I will stop there. And questions, observations, anything you want to say?
I'm going to jump in for a moment as folks are either thinking about their questions or putting them in the chat. And first to say thank you so much. That was really, I mean, I've been looking at all this and it was still just fascinating to hear you talk through all of the different categories and how you can look at the data. So thank you, and thank you for all of that. I also just want to thank everyone on the screen because your advocacy made this happen. And that's also super exciting to see all knowing all the work that went into the crime gun data analysis bill and the omnibus bill. And now we have data that we can use, which is super exciting. So thanks to all of you as well. My super quick question for you, and then we'll get to the ones in the chat, is what are your hopes and dreams for what will happen with this data moving forward?
Well, mine are, and Allie can tell you hers, but mine are that people like all of us on the phone, on the call here, and all of our friends and my students, and start using it. The big issue will be if it's being used, the state will see it as a value and they'll be more likely to keep thinking of it as something that they need to pay attention to talk about quality, to add more data. But if it's never being accessed and no one's looking at it, that's my fear is that the some people will say, see, no one really cared about this data. So why are we, to Mike's point, why are we spending money on pulling it together and putting it out there? So Mike had put in this in the chat about the how this is being funded, and you know, I don't know. It's mandated in the statute, so not everything mandated in statute in Massachusetts is put in place. This is. But at least we have something if they decided to stop doing it, that there is a statutory requirement that they do this. So that helps us.
Yeah,
Allie, any hopes
I
and dreams?
would just say, emphasizing how this is another tool in our advocacy toolbox. I see this as a great way to push back on a lot of the messaging out there of like, Massachusetts, why do you do gun violence prevention there? Like there's crime, there's guns, there's still we're just like any other US state. And so this is just another way to show that more with numbers beyond just the stories we've been hearing from our community. And then secondly, I feel like this also informs where we could go next with the coalition's advocacy work and community organizing work and everything else. Looking at where there are more gaps to still be addressed.
Great. Thank you. I see Nan has her hand up, so now I'm going to give you a minute to ask your question. I'm going to attend to one other thing, and then we are going to talk about the work ahead.
It's not a question. It's just saying that as somebody who came from a database background and who at one point saw the whole world through that lens, it's really impressive that you're bringing together this variety of data sets. That's what really strengthens the arguments, and I'm just very excited about this. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
And I just want to note the comments that Donna just put in about ERPOs, and we should think about implementation stuff and how do we continue to advocate for more data or different kinds of data, that this is a living thing, that it continues to evolve and give us what we need to make good policy and good practice recommendations and move the work forward. But we'll finish up here because we have more on our agenda. But I just want to thank Jack and Allie for your work putting this together. You're getting a lot of love in the chat, so I hope that you're seeing that. I think it was just really helpful and it made everything really come alive and gave us a picture of what all of that hard work has brought us to. So thanks to both of you.
Thank you all.
And now that we have talked about this amazing tool that came out of our advocacy for the 2024 bill, we also need to shift to talking about the work ahead to make sure that we protect this legislation because we know that this is having a positive impact. And we know that there are forces who are working to repeal this law. And I want to call on my friend and President Emerita Janet Goldenberg, who's been super involved in all of this advocacy and is now super involved in the work to protect the legislation, to tell us more. Janet?
Thanks, Ruth. And I want to, first of all, add my thanks to Jack and Allie for walking us through this database. I remember sitting around the coalition table like 13 years ago now, talking about how great it would be to have access to this data and how much stronger our arguments would be if we had access to the data. And to see it, we got little fits and starts and bits of it along the way, but to see it come to fruition in this way is really, really gratifying and exciting, and can't wait to see what Jack and his colleagues are able to do with it. So it's very exciting. Thank you to both you and Allie for walking us through that. And as Ruth said, no sooner did we get this thing passed than the local NRA affiliate decided this could not stand. And with a $50,000 check from Smith and Wesson, off they went to collect signatures to try to overturn the very law that regulates ghost guns and Glock switches and expands ERPOs and gives us this extraordinary database. And we're just not going to let that happen. So because Ruth had nothing else to do, in leading a coalition. She is also chairing the Vote Yes for a Safe Massachusetts campaign, and I am really honored to be sitting on the executive committee with her of that campaign, focused on November of 2026 and making sure that the referendum fails. And as counterintuitive as it might seem to be leading a Vote Yes campaign for a referendum that you want to fail, that is sort of the crux of the issue that I want to talk to everyone about today. When presented with the question, do you want this law to stand? Once they understand what's in it, most people want this law to stand. Most people understand the importance of it. They value it. They know it helps keep Massachusetts safe. But a lot of people don't know this referendum is happening in November. A lot of people don't know that the way to keep the law is to vote yes, not to vote no. And we need to really make sure that our message gets out there. And you all can play a really key role in that. So I want to just raise up in a couple minutes here a couple things that you can do to help us make sure we keep this law, that the referendum fails in November, and this database continues to exist and to grow. So one thing is you can just be informed, because we need everyone to be ambassadors for us as you're out in the community, as you're talking to your own people. You just need people to know, let them know this is happening in November, and here's why it matters, and here's what to do. So I want to highlight for you a briefing that's coming up so you can get more information about the campaign, about the law, about why it matters. Gabby Giffords is going to be joining us, and that is happening next Wednesday. I think it's March 18th, 6 or 6:30. I think probably someone's going to put in the chat in just a minute, like magic, a link so folks can register if they want to join us. This is a great opportunity to hear more about the campaign, be informed about it, and help us make sure that word gets out. We also are looking for endorsements, because we know a lot of people, there are going to be a lot of ballot questions. A lot of folks don't have the time or the energy or the interest to get into the weeds of all of these. And what they will do is they'll look at the website and they'll see who has endorsed. And if the folks they feel aligned with, if the folks they think share their perspective on the world have endorsed, they're inclined to go that direction. So it's really important to us that we get endorsements. And so for everyone on the screen, think about what groups you're involved in. It could be church, civic, political. Some of you might be on town committees. Where are the opportunities for us to speak, and where are the opportunities to get endorsements? Particularly want to raise up the need for endorsements in central and western Massachusetts, which is not to say we don't also want them in eastern Massachusetts, but we're going to also magically drop into the chat an endorsement form. So if you can share this around, we want to get as many endorsements as we can of the campaign, whether it's from businesses or civic groups or religious groups. And that's another way you can be really helpful. And I'm going to hold something up. I don't know how clear it will be. These are pledge cards. One of the things we know is going to happen, we're not going to get our question number till the summer. And by the time that happens, there's going to be a lot of noise about candidates and about other questions. We want to make sure people know what to do come election day when they go in and are handed a long, complicated ballot. So we want people to fill out these pledge cards. We're going to collect them, and then we're going to mail them back to people shortly before the election. And it will have the question number on them. And it will remind them right before they go into the polls why it's important to go, what question to look for, and to vote yes for us. So if some of you are interested in tabling, we're going to have opportunities for people to go to different, whether it's a city fair or a protest or a convention or any kind of event. If you can bring these postcards with you, get people to fill them out, collect them and send them back to us. It'll give us an audience of people to talk to get volunteers, to know who wants yard signs, but also it gives us a way to communicate with people shortly before the election, which is hugely important. So if you want these postcards, again, magic of the chat, there'll be a link down there, or you can just put the information in and say that you'd like some postcards, and we'll make sure they get them to you. And finally, and certainly I'm going to say last but not least, the campaign is always looking for funding. We need money to buy the pledge cards, to buy the yard signs, and to do the work we do. So there are various ways to support the Vote Yes campaign by going to the website of the campaign. So if you are interested in doing that, we would welcome that support as well. So that's just a quick overview of what's going on and how you can help. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Janet, not just for the presentation, but for all of the heart and soul that you put into this campaign and to all of the things that have led us here today. So just greatly appreciate you and all that you do. And I'm just going to pause for a moment to see if folks have other questions. I know Sonia asked about endorsements being public. We're working on building out that part of the website now, so that will be happening shortly. And any other questions before we get to announcements? And Allison, I think you're on here somewhere. If you can put your campaign email in the chat too, because that's another contact for folks who have questions about the campaign can reach out to Allison directly. As she's been doing a bunch of work with the campaign as well as the coalition, which has been terrific. Okay. Thank you, Allison. I love how things do magically appear in the chat. Um, Terrific. We have some announcements. We have a bunch of coalition events coming up. So I'm going to take the last couple of minutes of our hour together just to give you a quick glimpse of the events that are coming up. You will also see some links magically appearing in your chat if you want to register for any of these things. And I am going to go in chronological order. Next week on Thursday, March 19th, we are having our next Lunch and Learn with Dr. Jonathan Jay from the BU School of Public Health, as well as Levon Anderson from the BMC VIAP program, talking about some recent research about the impact of VIAP or hospital-based violence intervention programs on the folks who utilize those services. So we're looking forward to that. We are also having our next screening of This Ain't Normal, which is a film that many of you are familiar with. It's about youth impacted by violence and the street outreach workers who intervene with them every day. It is going to be in Brockton at Massasoit College on March 26th. And that is also in the chat. Save the date for Peace MVP, our 10th annual Peace MVP, which is also hard to believe. We are having it on April 15th at Temple Israel in Boston. As I keep on joking, it's the Ides of April. And we will be honoring Senate Majority Leader Cindy Cream and Judiciary Chair Michael Day for all of their work to construct this incredibly important legislation that we have been talking about today. And that information will also be in the chat. We are forming our team for the Mother's Day Walk for Peace. We started talking about that at the beginning of the hour. Please join us with your coalition t-shirts so we can be a small sea of orange walking in the crowd on Mother's Day. It is always an incredibly profoundly impactful event. And if you've not had the opportunity to walk before, I really encourage you. And then also in May, we're going to have our second quarterly meeting of the year, but it will be in person at the State House, followed by a lit drop that will be primarily focused on budget line items. It's going to be a hectic budget season, so we want to show up well for all of the line items that support violence intervention, support our member organizations. And that will be Tuesday, May 12th at 1 p.m. at the State House. And I think that I have covered all of the upcoming events. There will be more. We're starting to talk about Wear Orange in June. So we are really going to have a busy couple of months at the coalition, and we hope that you will join us for any and all of those things. You will see those communications as well in our socials and upcoming emails. So if you didn't catch it, you will get that information shortly. It is now 6:29. We have done well at keeping in our hour. And I will end with gratitude for our speakers today, for Mark for getting us started, for Ali and Jack for that terrific tour of this really important data dashboard that I think is going to become a part of the fabric of how we think about things at the coalition, for Janet for telling us about the work at the campaign, and my thanks to all of you, our coalition community, for everything that you do to support not just our work at the coalition, but the work of keeping folks safe, because this is what it's all about, is keeping our community safe from gun violence. And we thank you for being our partners in that work. I hope you all have a great evening. we will see you all very soon at one of the many events that are coming up.